We all know Abraham Lincoln, the man who saved the Union, ended slavery, and paid for it with his life. His face is carved into mountains, printed on money, and etched into history books forever. But here's what almost nobody talks about. While Lincoln's legacy as a president grew larger than life, his own family was falling apart in silence. His wife was locked away, his children were buried before their time, and his only surviving son seemed cursed, standing near the scene of not one, not two, but three presidential assassinations. And perhaps most haunting of all, within just a few generations, the Lincoln family name itself would vanish. How does the bloodline of America's most iconic president simply disappear? Today we uncover the madness, the mystery, and the vanishing legacy of Abraham Lincoln's descendants. Abraham Lincoln's story is often told in terms of politics, war, and sacrifice. But at its heart, it was also a family story. In 1842, Lincoln married Mary Todd, a woman from a wealthy Kentucky family, who was as ambitious and strong-willed as Lincoln himself. Together they would raise 4 sons, though fate dealt them a cruel hand. Their first child, Robert Todd Lincoln, was born in 1843. He would grow to adulthood, but his relationship with his father was often distant, shaped by Lincoln's constant political work. Their second son, Edward, arrived in 1846, but died just 4 years later of what doctors then called consumption. The third son, Willie, was said to be Lincoln's favorite. Bright, affectionate, and full of promise, Willie died at just 11 years old in the White House, devastating both parents. Their youngest, Tad, born in 1853, lived only into his teenage years, passing away at 18. By the time of Lincoln's assassination in 1865, only Robert remained. What began as a hopeful young family had, within 2 decades, become a line scarred by loss, setting the stage for a legacy marked as much by tragedy as triumph. Mary Todd Lincoln's life was one of privilege, ambition, and ultimately heartbreak. She was highly educated for her time, politically astute, and deeply supportive of her husband's rise. Yet beneath her sharp intellect was a woman burdened by grief. She endured the unimaginable loss of 3 sons during her lifetime: Edward, Willie, and Tad. The most crushing blow came with Abraham Lincoln's assassination in 1865, just as the Civil War ended. Stricken with sorrow, Mary's behavior grew erratic and unpredictable. She spent lavishly, suffered from paranoia, and became increasingly unstable in the eyes of others. In 1875, her only surviving son, Robert, petitioned to have her declared insane. She was briefly confined to an asylum, a decision that fractured their relationship. Some historians argue she was unfairly treated, a victim of trauma and 19th century misunderstandings of mental health. Her story remains one of tragedy, resilience, and controversy. Robert Todd Lincoln was the only one of Abraham and Mary, Todd Lincoln's children, to survive into adulthood, carrying both the promise of the Lincoln name and the weight of a family haunted by tragedy. Born in 1843, Robert grew up largely in the shadow of his father's political ambitions. While Abraham traveled, debated, and eventually led a nation through civil war, Robert was often left under the care of tutors or relatives, developing a reserved and cautious personality. As a young man, Robert distinguished himself academically, attending Harvard University and later studying law at the University of Chicago and Harvard Law School. Despite his achievements, he seemed destined to live a life marked by the misfortunes that plagued his family. History seemed to follow Robert in uncanny ways. In 1865, he was not at Ford's Theater when his father was shot, but was summoned to the Peterson House across the street, where he witnessed Lincoln's final hours. 16 years later, in 1881, he became an eyewitness to the shooting of President James Garfield at a train station in Washington, D.C. Then, in 1901, while visiting the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, New York, he was just steps away when President William McKinley was assassinated, arriving shortly after the shooting. Robert's life was one of public service and private caution. He served as Secretary of War under Presidents Garfield and Arthur, later becoming president of the Pullman Company. He married Mary Harlan and had 3 children, But despite his accomplishments, Robert's life remained intertwined with a legacy of loss and proximity to history's tragedies, a constant reminder of the burden carried by Lincoln's surviving son. Robert Todd Lincoln's children were the next chapter in a family already marked by both prominence and misfortune. He and his wife, Mary Harlan, had 3 children: Mary Mamie Lincoln, Jesse Harlan Lincoln, and Abraham Lincoln II, affectionately known as Jack. Jack, the youngest, carried the Lincoln name with promise, but tragedy struck early. He died in 1890 at the age of 16 from illness, cutting short any hope of continuing the male Lincoln line. Mamie and Jesse both married and had children, but their children took their husbands' surnames, Isham and Beckwith, which meant that while Lincoln's bloodline persisted, the surname and direct male lineage came to an end. Despite the loss of Jack, Mamie and Jesse's families maintained ties to history, preserving artifacts, letters, and memories of the Lincoln legacy. Yet their lives were often quiet, lived in the shadow of a name that had once commanded a nation's attention. This generation represented both hope and sorrow, the promise of continuity through Robert's descendants, and the stark reality that the Lincoln surname and direct patrilineal line would soon vanish, leaving a family remembered more for what was lost than what remained. The Lincoln family story is steeped in tragedy and intrigue. Mary Todd Lincoln struggles with grief and mental health, Robert's eerie proximity to multiple presidential assassinations, and the early deaths of their children all cast a shadow over the family. While Abraham Lincoln became immortalized in history, his descendants lived in relative obscurity, haunted by loss and circumstance. The direct Lincoln surname ended with Robert Todd Lincoln Beckwith, yet whispers of the family's bloodline continue quietly through female descendants. Their story is a haunting reminder. Greatness may endure, but the human lives behind it remain fragile and fleeting. As the Lincoln family story fades into history, we're left with a haunting question. How can the bloodline of one of America's greatest leaders vanish, leaving behind only echoes of tragedy, madness, and mystery? Abraham Lincoln shaped a nation, but his own family lived in the shadow of grief and circumstance, a reminder that even the most iconic names cannot escape the fragility of life. What do you think? Was it fate, circumstance, or something else that led to the disappearance of Lincoln's direct legacy? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear your theories. If the idea of history's what-ifs fascinates you, don't miss our next video. What if JFK was never assassinated? Explore the twists of history that could have changed the world forever. Click here to continue uncovering history's mysteries.